I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing Tony Hoagland, whose poetry has been a continual pleasure to me since I first discovered it. Tony is a poet of relationships with family, friends, and most of all, this big, beautiful, wily, and often nasty world. Sometimes those relationships are clearest after death and demand metamorphosis, as when his father is turned into a dog, or he sees his dead mother in a lesbian bar with a nose stud and a tattoo of a parrot on her arm. And no one does anger better than Tony, that piercing, righteous indignation. In one of his most sublime poems, he chastises himself for not standing up for D.H. Lawrence when some petty mind is dismissive of that great writer, but soon turns on the sneer with words like swords. Not only is he a warrior, but he's also a juggler, throwing up the balls of high culture with those of TV, volleyball, Jimi Hendrix, and a high school marching band playing Louie Louie, and keeping them all in the air until we are dizzy and dazzled and filled with their magic. In a new poem I just read in the magazine, he turns buying a Coke from a machine into that all too human hope that, despite our mistakes and stupidity, there is still something dark and sweet and sparkling around the corner. It's this optimism that I love in Tony's work. We make mistakes, we make a lot of them, and people can be cruel and heartless, but there is also beauty, and it can arise in the most unusual places, as in the middle of the night on a car radio, when an Italian tenor's soaring aria makes him want to renounce the whole world or fall in love with it forever. It is this passion that infuses his poetry, and a playful abandon that asks all the hard questions and finds no easy answers, but keeps looking all the same. Tony's work has won many prizes. Especially important was the 1997 James Laughlin Award that the Academy of American Poets gives to the best second book of a poet. There are a lot of first book prizes, but not many second book prizes. His last book, What Narcissism Means to Me, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle, and he's recently received the O.B. Hardison Prize from the Folger Library. Did I mention that he's funny? He is, and heartbreaking, and so witty that Oscar Wilde is probably turning in his unquiet grave. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Hoagland.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That really made me feel like I could get up here and read. So I'm so happy to be with all of you. This is a wonderful festival. There are such good writers in my class, and they have such a wonderful attitude. And the poets who I'm here with, I really don't have the words to say how much I owe to them and what a privilege it is to be with you. I've been talking to my class this weekend, seems like a week already, and about how voices are composed of hybrids, that poets are cannibals. You eat the other poets who you really love and you turn them into yourself. And there are many people here who are part of me, at least it's my intention that they're part of me. And it's also a splendid, great pleasure to have all the Florida gang here, which are, many of my very, very favorite poets. It's, thrilling to be here. And of course, I'll give the obligatory tribute to Miles, which is, this is a very well-run festival, Only someone who has been in business once, could do this. So, and one more thing, which is, it's a privilege to read with Jane Hirshfield, who has such an exquisite and intelligent relationship to ignorance. Sort of keeping with that, I'm going to read a poem about a holy fool first. This is somebody who, it's kind of a 70s poem, I suppose. There's somebody who is a student of life, but who has acquired most of his wisdom by watching a television program about an androgynous quasi-Asian martial arts expert who travels around the old American West solving community problems with his kung fu skills. And the person who has watched all these television programs has listened closely to the flashbacks to the guru when the guru says things like, "Mend the cloth before it is torn," or, "Though the lotus blossom is white, it is rooted in mud." And the title is the first line. Fred had watched a lot of kung fu episodes. So when the policeman asked to see his driver's license, he said, "Does the wind need permission from the hedgehog to blow?" Which resulted in a search of the car, which miraculously yielded nothing, since Fred had swallowed all the mescaline already and was just beginning to fall in love with the bushy caterpillar eyebrows of the officer in question. In those days, we could identify the fingerprints on a guitar string by the third note of the song broadcast from the window of a passing car. But we couldn't tell the difference between a personal disaster and having an experience. So Fred thought being locked up for the night was kind of fun, with the graffiti in the drunk tank wall chattering in Mandarin, and the sentient cockroaches coming out to visit in triplicate. Back then, it wasn't a question of pleasure or pain. It wasn't a question of getting to the top, then trying not to fall at any cost. It was a question of staying tuned in, one episode at a time, said Fred to himself, as he walked home the next morning under the spreading lotus trees on Walnut Street, feeling oriental. This is kind of a love poem. It's a romance poem, and the two people in the poem have just watched a nature documentary, one of those things on PBS about what badgers do and what dragonflies do, and it's affected their subjectivity for the moment. It's called Romantic Moment. After the nature documentary, we walked down Canyon Road onto the plaza of art galleries and high-end clothing stores, where the mock orange is fragrant in the summer night and the smooth adobe walls glow flesh-like in the dark. It is just our second date, and we sit down on a bench holding hands, not looking at each other. And if I were a bull penguin right now, I would lean over and vomit softly into the mouth of my beloved. And if I were a peacock, I'd flex my gluteal muscles to erect and spread the quills of my Cinemax tail. If she were a female walking stick bug, she might insert her hypodermic proboscis delicately into my neck and inject me with a rich hormonal sedative before attaching her egg sac to my thoracic undercarriage. And if I were a young chimpanzee, I would break off a nearby tree limb and smash all the windows in the plaza jewelry stores. And if she were a Brazilian leopard frog, she would wrap her impressive tongue 3 times around my right thigh and pummel me lightly against the surface of our pond, and I would know her feelings were sincere. Instead, we sit a while in silence until she remarks that in the relative context of tortoises and iguanas, human males seem to be actually rather expressive. And I say that female crocodiles really don't receive enough credit for their gentleness. Then she suggests that it is time for us to go to get some ice cream cones and eat them. This is sort of one of those survey of the social texture of America poems, which it takes place in the gathering place of our culture now, which is the shopping mall, where we come together, all ages, all races, to communicate with each other, pretty much. And it takes place in a particular place in the shopping mall, which is the food court, where the cuisines of so many different nations are sampled and discussed by Americans seeking to broaden their horizons. It's called food court. If you want to talk about America, why not just mention Jimmy's Walk and Roll American Chinese Gourmet Emporium? The cloud of steam rising from the bean sprouts and the shredded cabbage. When the oil is sprayed on from a giant plastic bottle wielded by Ramon, Jimmy's main employee, who hates having to wear the sanitary hairnet and who thinks the food smells shitty. And the secretaries from the law firm drifting in from work at noon to fill the tables of the food court in their cotton skirts and oddly sexy running shoes. Why not mention the little grove of palm trees maintained by the mall corporation, and the splashing fountain beside it, and the faint smell of dope smoke drifting from the men's room, where two boys from the suburbs, dropped off by their moms with their baggy ghetto pants and skateboards, are getting ready to pronounce their first sentences in African American. Oh yes, everything all chopped up and stirred together in the big steel pan held over a medium-high blue flame while Jimmy watches with his practical black eyes. Let's see. This is also a poem about relationships and plastic. And I want to read this for Campbell McGrath, who's, whose poems have showed many of us how to do something that we wouldn't have conceived of otherwise. Well, I could easily say that of many of the poets here, but it's called Plastic. One could theoretically write a poem about the plastic used for almost everything. The little ivory forks at picnics and green toy dinosaurs in playrooms everywhere. The rooks and pawns of cheap $4.95 chess sets made in the People's Republic of China, and those Tupperware containers which open with a quiet, perfect pop to yield the tuna fish sandwich about to enter the mouth of the secretary on his lunch break. You could write about how the big molecules were bound in chains by chemical reactions, then liquefied and poured like soup into intricate factory molds for toy soldiers and back scratchers, airsick bags, and high-tech Teflon roof racks. You could mull over the ethics of enslaving matter, even while feeling admiration for the genius it takes to persuade a molecule to become part of a casserole container. Or in this case, the cheap polyethylene water bottle I saw sitting on a table in the park on Saturday between two people having a conversation about their relationship, which I could tell was probably near its end, since the various lubrications usually coating the human voice were all worn away, leaving just the rough, gritty surfaces of need and fear exposed and rubbing on each other. I wonder if it would have done any good if I had walked over and explained a few things to them about plastic, about how it is so much easier to stretch than the material of human nature, which accounts for some of the strain imposed on the late 20th century South, occasionally causing what has been called interpersonal adhesive malfunction. They might have been relieved to know that science had an explanation for their troubled feelings at that precise moment of modern living, which might be why each of them kept reaching out to seize the plastic water bottle and suck from it in fierce little symbolic gulps, as if the water was helping them to wash down something hard to ingest, though their red elastic lips, wrapped around the stem of the bottle, were so much more beautiful than plastic, and the smooth ripple of their flexible, muscular throats made the only sound audible above the silence now starting to stretch over everything. This is a poem that someone sort of asked me to read. It's a kind of poem. It's kind of it's an ambient landscape. I guess the person in the poem is driving and just sort of thinking. This is the problem with many poems, of course, is just thinking, but this is it anyway. It's called A Color of the Sky. Why is it called that? I don't know. The color of the sky. Windy today, and I feel less than brilliant, driving over the hills from work. There are the dark parts of the road when you pass through clumps of wood, and the bright spots where you have a view of the ocean. But that doesn't make the road an allegory. I should call Marie and apologize for being so boring at dinner last night. But can I really promise not to be that way again? And anyway, I'd rather watch the trees tossing in what certainly looks like sexual arousal. Otherwise, it's spring, and everything looks frail. The sky is baby blue, and the just unfurling leaves are full of infant chlorophyll, the very tint of inexperience. Last summer's song is making a comeback on the radio, and on the highway overpass, the only metaphysical vandal in America has painted "Memory Loves Time" in big black spray paint letters, which makes us wonder if time loves memory back. Last night, I dreamed of X again. She's like a stain on my subconscious sheets. Years ago, she penetrated me, and though I scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, I never got her out. But now I'm glad. What I thought was an end turned out to be a middle. What I thought was a brick wall turned out to be a tunnel. What I thought was an injustice turned out to be a color of the sky. Outside the youth center, between the liquor store and the police station, a little dogwood tree is losing its mind, overflowing with blossom foam, like a sudsy mug of beer, like a bride ripping off her clothes, dropping snow-white petals to the ground in clouds. So nature's wastefulness seems quietly obscene. It's been doing that all week, making beauty and throwing it away and making more. I'm going to read. This poem is. We'll soon be in airports again, going home, and we'll be in that sewage stream of media, in which we're being both privileged and punished by the volume of data and the buying opportunities that confront us. And this, to me, this is very clearly a kind of suffering, but it's such a luxurious kind of suffering that it seems indecent to complain about it. So in this poem, I have one of my students complain about it, and then I make fun of my student for complaining about it. It's called America. Then one of the students, with blue hair and a tongue stud, says that America is for him a maximum security prison, whose walls are made of Radio Shacks and Burger Kings, and MTV episodes where you can't tell the show from the commercials. And as I consider how to express how full of shit I think he is, he says, that even when he's driving to the mall in his Isuzu Trooper with a gang of his friends, letting rap music pour over them like a boiling jacuzzi full of ball-peen hammers, even then he feels buried alive, captured and suffocated in the folds of the thick satin quilt of America. And I wonder if this is a legitimate category of pain, or whether he is just spin-doctoring a better grade. And then I remember that when I stabbed my father in the dream last night, it was not blood, but money that gushed out of him. Bright green $100 bills spilling from his wounds. And this is the funny part. He gasped, "Thank God, those Ben Franklins were clogging up my heart." And so I perish happily, freed from that which kept me from my liberty. Which is when I knew it was a dream, since my dad would never speak in rhymed couplets. And I look at the student with his acne and his cell phone and his phony ghetto clothes, and I think, I am asleep in America too, and I don't know how to wake myself either. And I remember what Marx said near the end of his life. I was listening to the cries of the past when I should have been listening to the cries of the future. But how could he have imagined 100 channels of 24-hour cable? Or what kind of nightmare it might be when each day you watch rivers of bright merchandise run past you, and you are floating in your pleasure boat upon that river, even while others are drowning underneath you, and you see their faces twisting in the surface of the waters, and yet it seems to be your own hand which turns the volume higher. And this is sort of in a similar rut. This is about we are provided with many very special, wonderful, never-before-experienced postmodern moments. This is the one where you're in the grocery store, or the Walmart, or the Walgreens, and you're looking for something, and you hear a song that you once loved, which has been turned into Muzak. Like you hear John Lennon Imagine being played by xylophones. And you realize, the end of the world is here, everything is broken, and there is no center. In this poem, the speaker hears the Bob Dylan song, "It's a Hard Rain's Gonna Fall," which is an apocalyptic song being played in a Muzak form, and realizes the hard rain has fallen. After I heard "It's a Hard Rain's Gonna Fall," played softly by an accordion quartet, through the ceiling speakers of the Springdale shopping mall, I understood. There's nothing we can't pluck the stinger from, nothing we can't turn into a soft drink flavor or a t-shirt. Even serenity can become something horrible if you make a commercial about it, using smiling, white-haired people quoting Thoreau to sell retirement homes in the Everglades, where the swamp has been drained and bulldozed into a 19-hole golf course with electrified alligator barriers. "You can't keep beating yourself up, Billy," I heard the therapist say to the teenage murderer, "about all those people you killed. You just have to be the best person you can be, one day at a time." And everybody in the audience weeps a little because the level of deep feeling has been touched. And they want to believe that the power of forgiveness is greater than the power of consequence or history. Dear Abby, my father is a businessman who travels. Each time he returns from one of his trips, his shoes and trousers are covered with blood. But he never forgets to bring me a nice present. Should I say something? Signed, America. I used to think that I was not part of this, that I could mind my own business and get along. But that was just another song that had been taught to me since birth, whose words I was humming under my breath as I was walking through the Springdale Mall. And I'll read 3 more poems. This is a poem set in a Chinese restaurant, and it's called Fortune. Fortune cookies are no longer what they once were, which is never what they were in China. Chinese fortune cookies. So they used to actually suggest futures for you, and they do in this poem. And the poem is about sort of being in the midst of fortune and wanting to be able to recognize it. I wrote it after I had had Chinese dinner with a bunch of friends of mine, and or people that I know, actually. They broke the fortune cookies open, which is a wonderful thing to do. They read their fortunes, and everybody read their fortunes to each other because we're Americans and we don't believe in secrets. And they wanted me to read my fortune to them, and I didn't want to. Fortune. In the Chinese restaurant, it is the perfect forethought and timing with which the slices of orange arrive on a small plate with the bill. So, while you are paying what is owed, the sweet juice fills your mouth for free. And the fortune cookie, too, which offers you the pleasure of breakage, and then that other pleasure of discovery, extracting and reading the little strip of paper with a happiness that you maybe conceal, the way the child you once were is even now concealed inside you. Maybe you will marry a red-headed woman. Maybe you are going to take a long journey. Maybe a red-headed woman will steal your car and take a long journey. Maybe you will be buried next to your mother. And when the people you are dining with smile and read their fortunes out loud and ask you to tell them your own, you smile and tell them a lie. And they laugh and think that you are weird and funny and sad. And you know that you are all of those things. But you don't tell them the truth because you don't trust anyone, and you never have. That is your fortune. I'll read this poem called When Dean Young Talks About Wine, which is about my dear friend, Dean Young. He did talk about wine in a slightly pretentious way. But the reason his name is in the poem, actually, is because I stole the form of the poem from one of his poems. I haven't always made that clear in the past, and I want to change my ways. So this is a poem about it's about the language of wine connoisseurship, which is such a good target for comedy. And it's so many things at once. And the goods, you want to spin it good, and you would say that it's teaching some Americans how to use metaphor. When Dean Young talks about wine, the grape cries out in the wine vat crusher. The grapevine bleeds when the knife cuts through the stem. But when Dean Young talks about wine, his voice is strangely calm. Yet it seems that wine is rarely mentioned. He says, "Great first chapter, but no plot." He says, "Long runway, short flight." He says, "This one never had a secret." He says, "You can't wear stripes with that." He squints as if recalling his childhood in France. He purses his lips and shakes his head at the glass. 84 was a naughty year, he says. And for a second, I worry that California has turned him into a sushi eater in a cravat. Then he says, "This one makes clear the difference between a thoughtless remark and an unwarranted intrusion." Then he says, in this one, the Pacific last light of afternoon stains the wings of the seagull pink at the very edge of the postcard. But where is the Cabernet of rent checks and asthma medication? Where is the Burgundy of orthopedic shoes? Where is the Chablis of skinned knees and jelly sandwiches, with the aftertaste of cruel Little League coaches and the undertone of rusty station wagon? His mouth is purple, as if from his own ventricle he had drunk. He sways like a fishing rod. When a beast is hurt, it roars in incomprehension. When a bird is hurt, it huddles in its nest. But when a man is hurt, he makes himself an expert. Then he stands there with a glass in his hand, staring into nothing, as if he was forming an opinion. Thanks.